They called me a genius, a master of 1,000 languages, a builder of modern worlds. But as I lay dying at 50, none of those languages could stop the cold creeping into my bones. I thought I had a family, but I was a ghost in my own house. My wife? She was a stranger who shared my bed until the day she realized I had nothing left to give. Then she vanished. Now here I am, 50 years of brilliance, dying in a cold bed. Is this it? Is this how the great scholar ends? Then the darkness broke. I saw a galaxy of light, millions of books floating in a void of pure white. My soul reached out and touched one, the galaxy of multiple languages. In an instant, the symbols burned into my mind. Then, a cry, my sound. I opened my eyes to a world of blurry shapes. An old woman was lifting me, passing me to another. A woman with eyes like the morning sun. She looked at me, crying, and whispered, "A boy. I have a boy." For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I felt it. Warmth. I have a mother. By the 3rd week, the fog in my tiny brain cleared. I looked around our home. To my scholar's eyes, it was a disaster. I crawled to a jagged hole in the mud wall and looked outside. What I saw was worse. 2 grown men were rolling in the dirt, snarling and tearing at a piece of raw, bloody meat like starving wolves. To them, this was survival. To me, it was a math problem waiting to be solved. I retreated to my white library and looked at the civilization shelf. If I was going to be happy here, if I wanted to be loved, I couldn't just live in this mess. I had to build. A month passed. The leather curtain moved and a massive shadow fell over us. It was him, the great chieftain, my father. He didn't look at me with love. He looked at me like a weapon. He pulled a jagged bone knife from his belt, pressed it into my mother's hand, and whispered, "Survive." He threw 3 silver fish onto the dirt, unsure if it was enough. I moved. I raised 1 finger. I grunted. He stopped. I raised a second. Duh. He leaned in, eyes wide with wonder. By the 3rd finger, I saw the spark in his brain. He started mimicking me. Later, he showed the hunters the 3. No fighting, no chaos, just logic. My name is Kutan, and the foundation of my kingdom has been laid. 5 years have passed. My father wanted a warrior who could swing a bone axe, but I was building something far more dangerous: efficiency. The tribe was dying, not from war, but from the river. To them, it was a curse. To me, it was a cocktail of disease. I looked closer. My eyes didn't see water. They saw a battlefield. Needed to engineer a solution. I started with a hollowed log and the Earth's own anatomy. Charcoal to trap the toxins, sand to catch the silt, gravel to break the flow. Simple. Logical. I forced the first drop. My father watched, his hand on his axe, waiting for the magic to fail. Then the miracle. A single crystal-clear drop. Pure. Luminous. He drank. For the first time in his life, he didn't taste the mud. He tasted the future. Clean water kept them alive, but it didn't keep them fed. Our blacksmith, Thrum, was a man of infinite muscle and 0 precision. He was fighting the stone, and the stone was winning. I sat beside him. I didn't reach for a hammer. I reached for a bone. You don't break the stone to find the edge. You talk to it. I showed him the galaxy of knowledge. Every stone has a heart, a point where the atoms are ready to part. Pressure, thrum, not impact. Direct the energy here.
His eyes widened. He wasn't looking at a child anymore. He was looking at a master.
We spent weeks in the smoke. We moved from obsidian to heat-treated flint. By the time we were done, the tribe didn't have rocks. They had scalpels. It happened at the hour of the wolf. The straw huts didn't just fail us. They betrayed us. Fire is the enemy of the circle. A single spark, and your world becomes a furnace. Thrum fought like a demon, but you cannot protect a home made of tinder. By dawn, we didn't have a village. We had a graveyard of ash. I walked to Thrum. He was cleaning the blood and soot from his hands. I told him, never again. We will build with the earth, not the grass. As a blacksmith, Thrum knew the secret. Fire doesn't destroy clay, it makes it eternal. He knew where the stone soil lay. I asked him, find me the clay that fire cannot eat. Find me the wood that the spear cannot pierce. We didn't just design a house. We designed a shield. Square walls mean interlocking fire zones. Thick clay means an arrow-proof life. Thrum carved the first heavy wooden mold. He wasn't making a tool. He was making the armor for our people. Fire had taught us that straw was a lie. I needed the earth's marrow. Thrum knew where the river had died 1,000 years ago, leaving behind a vein of pure, oily clay. Clay alone is brittle. It needs a skeleton. I showed Thrum the ratio. 3 parts sand for drainage, 2 parts clay for the bond, and the long fiber iron grass for tension. Construction requires calories. The tribe was hunting lean gazelle, wasting energy for a handful of meat. While scouting for timber with Thrum, I found the engine of civilization. They called it swampweed. I called it oryza. Low fat, high carbohydrate, and infinitely storable. The fuel for an army of builders.
We marched back with the weight of the future on our shoulders. Thrum carried the clay, the skeleton of our new world. I carried the rice, its heartbeat. To Thrum, it was just a seed. To my eyes, it was a biological machine. High caloric density, long-term storage, the fuel for a permanent civilization.
The meeting was already a circle of despair. The elders were chanting for a retreat to the caves. They wanted to hide in the dark because they feared the light of change. The spirits have sent the fire because we have offended the earth. We must leave. We must hide in the deep caves where the fire demons cannot find us. I stepped into their circle. I didn't bring prayers. I brought reality. I dropped the golden stalks at my father's feet. The caves are for the dead, elder. We have found the grain that will end our hunger. But we cannot store it in straw. We cannot protect it in circles. I showed them the alchemy. Fire destroys straw, but fire makes clay into stone. I looked at the men who were tired of running. I gave them the square. The elders called it an insult to the spirits. I called it an upgrade. I put the bone mold into Thrum's hands and told him, precision is the only prayer that is ever answered. Thrum was the first to master the movement, the rhythmic slap of the wet clay, the strike of the level, the slow, perfect extraction. We didn't just make one, we made 1,000. I visualized the village not as a collection of huts, but as a grid of logic. A circle rests on the earth. A square commands it. We dug deep, past the ash of the dead world, to find the bedrock. I taught Thrum the secret of the plumb line. Gravity is a constant. If you ignore it, the wall becomes a falling hammer. The father came to watch. He saw the warriors who used to only know how to kill, now learning how to create. He saw a tribe becoming a nation. I didn't just give them a design, I gave them a rhythm. Construction is a dance of thousands of small, identical steps. Thrum was my first student. I taught his hands the memory of the rectangle. He stopped fighting the stone and started commanding the mud. 1 brick is a curiosity. 10,000 bricks is a revolution. By the 3rd day, the riverbank was covered in the silent, gray soldiers of our future. We didn't build on the ash. We dug through it. I made them find the heart rock, the layer of earth that does not move when the world shakes. I taught them the rule of the plum, a single stone on a string. Gravity is the only judge that cannot be bribed. Father watched us. He didn't understand the physics, but he understood the weight. For the first time since the fire, I saw the fear in his eyes replaced by something far more dangerous: ambition. The first house wasn't just a shelter, it was a challenge. That night, the elders came with torches. They wanted to prove that the spirits would devour the square, just as they had devoured the circle. They threw the fire against the base. They expected a roar, a scream of burning thatch. But the earth does not scream. It simply absorbs. I stepped out from behind the wall. The elders froze. To them, I was a ghost standing in a tomb. To me, they were just men, afraid of a world they could no longer explain. I picked up the fallen torch and handed it back to the head elder. I told him, "The fire is finished with us. Go find a new god. This one belongs to the square." The fire was finished with us, but the hunger was not. We had won the battle for the earth, but we were losing the war against time.
1 man can grind enough for a day. 10 men can grind enough for a week. But an empire needs to grind enough for a century. We were outgrowing our own hands.
I took Thrum to the river, not to the clay pits this time, but to the falls. I didn't see a god in the water. I saw a massive, untapped battery. I explained the logic of the wheel. If we could capture the weight of the river, we could retire the muscles of our people. Thrum didn't understand the physics, but he understood the power. To build a machine, you need a spine. We went back to the forest to find a tree that had spent 100 years becoming as hard as stone. Precision was our only religion. If the axle was off by a hair, the friction would eat the wood. If the paddles were uneven, the river would rip the machine apart. The tribe thought we were building a monument to a new god. They watched from the tall grass, whispering about the great wooden skeleton. They didn't realize we were building the first heart of the village, a heart that never tires and never bleeds. The day of the engagement arrived. To Thrum, it was a test of his strength. To me, it was a test of my mathematics. If the paddles were uneven by even a single degree, the river would not turn the machine. It would destroy it. The day we dropped the wheel into the current, the river fought us. It didn't want to be tamed. It wanted to remain a wild, chaotic god. But gravity doesn't care about the ego of a river. Then, the first click. The weight of the water met the resistance of the wood. The axle turned. For the first time in human history, the river was no longer just a path. It was an engine. I designed the transmission to be simple. A vertical rotation turned into a horizontal strike. Logic translated into motion. The river was now grinding the rice that the fire couldn't burn. I beckoned the women forward. I told them to put the stones down. I showed them the basin where the river would do the work of 1,000 hands in a single hour. The elders stood outside in the rain, watching the wheel churn the white water. They said the river would take its revenge. I told them the river had already been paid. in the hours of life I had just given back to my people. The watermill gave us time, but time gave us curiosity. While the tribe ate, I looked at the waste Thrum had found near the river, the heavy blood-red stones that stone tools couldn't break. Thrum called it stubborn stone. He had tried to nap it into a spear, but it wouldn't flake. It only dented. He didn't realize he was holding the skeleton of a new age. To unlock the iron, you have to starve the rock of oxygen. You need a heat that the open air cannot provide. We needed the blast furnace. We used the adobe bricks to build a tower, a throat for the fire. Thrum fed it charcoal in the red stones. We waited for the earth to bleed. The watermill groaned as it pumped the bellows. Huff, whir, huff. The fire turned from orange to a blinding, terrifying white. The alchemy of saponification was child's play compared to this. When we broke the clay seal, it didn't look like a sword. It was a bloom, a jagged, glowing sponge of raw iron. But to me, it was beautiful. This was the moment of truth. Iron is a stubborn child. You have to beat the impurities out of it until it remembers its purpose. We didn't make a weapon yet. We made a hammerhead. Because to make better iron, you need iron tools. The first loop of the industrial age was closed. The sun had done its part, but to survive the coming storm, we needed a heat that didn't come from the sky. We needed to bake the earth until it turned into stone. We had logic, but the wild always has chaos. To protect the square while we built the Great Wall, we needed more than just workers. We needed the guard. Thrum wasn't just making hammers. We took the very best iron from the first bloomery and forged the perimeter spears. Not for hunting, but for the first time, for defense. The dust arrived first, and then the shapes within it. They didn't have weapons. They only had wounds. My father raised his hand, signaling the iron guard. His instinct was survival. More mouths meant more danger. But my HUD was scanning for a different variable: information.